Zoe, it seems like SPADs working under Johnson didn't just hate him, but other ministers they worked with, and also, in some cases, each other. But then according to Cummings, the SPADs were also running the entire show. Is it becoming increasingly hard to apportion blame beyond just saying, we know what Boris Johnson was at the top, and therefore he should get it all? But then, unfortunately, there are other layers of people. So it's practically, how do you manage that?
Well, I think it goes back to what Alex says. If you're the Prime Minister, it's your job to manage things and make those decisions. Now, absolutely, there is, in the civil service, SPADs, senior civil servants, members' staff, all of them, to some degree, their skill set has to involve a degree of people management. So if you are a SPAD or a senior civil servant, you will have to deal with several different ministers who all have slightly different working styles. They like to receive their information in a certain way. Sometimes that might be great and you might work really well together. Sometimes it might be much more difficult. But part of your job is to manage that and to adapt a little bit to their style. So I do think there are questions, and we saw that when Martin Reynolds was giving evidence about when was Johnson told things, why was there a blackout of emails at certain points when arguably the virus was getting more severe across the world. Was he told how bad things were? Of course, we need to ask those questions. We need to ask where the civil service might have failed in certain respects. But at the end of the day, the fish rots from the head, in that the leader, the Prime Minister, the head of department, whoever it is, sets the tone for how that department operates. You set the precedent for how you want to be communicated with. And if you're not listening to the advice from your advisors or from your civil servants, then there is an issue there and it belongs to you. It doesn't belong to them. There's only, this is the political players in this are elected. They ultimately have the power. So civil servants, SPADs, they can only do so much, and then eventually it's up to the minister to decide whether they're going to listen. Absolutely, we need to look at all of it. We need to look at the advice that was given by external parties as well, by scientific advisors, things like that. But ultimately, of course, the buck does stop with Johnson and previous prime ministers, previous ministers who left the country and public services in such a state that they weren't able to cope. David Cameron, George Osborne, who presided over austerity, the ministers who presided over the pandemic preparedness test. All of these people have things to answer for because ultimately they were making the decisions at the time.
And I thought Helen McNamara, who gave evidence on Wednesday when we're recording, I thought she made a really good point actually on this. She said this is not just some bit of procedurology, They are the people who are accountable. The reason you go to them and you present the options and they need to agree this stuff is not some sort of yes, Minister Humphrey-esque manipulation. They need to make that choice because they are the ones that will be up in the House of Commons explaining it. They're the ones that will take the flag come the next election. And so I think that blurring of the lines was really lethal, really lethal. This notion that I don't like making decisions, so you make them.
For so many civil servants and public servants who work with elected people, right? They will tell you that the majority of the frustration in their job is trying to get a member to take something seriously or trying to get them to drop something that they don't think is important, but they don't have to deal with the political context as well. No. So there are other reasons that aren't just policy-based or following the science that Johnson will have made certain decisions. And I'm sure we'll come to that. We'll talk about the influence of his backbenchers. But, if you're a good civil servant, you're also aware of that. And you can only do as much as you can do until eventually the buck no longer stops with you. So absolutely, I think that the blurring of those lines, clearly the fact that Johnson needed to have his hand held so much and needed people to get in his way and say nothing goes through anyone else except me anymore. I mean, that's when the question is, how did Johnson allow this to happen?
I mean, there are messages where the advisors and the civil servants are telling each other, you have to brief him like 5 minutes before he comes into the room. Otherwise, he's winging it. Otherwise, he forgets the information or someone else has spoken to him and he's changed his mind.
Having been a civil servant and a parliamentary clerk, it's not that uncommon. Some members have really ridiculous, but then they are really busy. So it's just, you have to learn how you deal with that that member, and sometimes you might work together very well and sometimes you might not.
Yes, but because I've also been a civil servant, and most of them, I think, have some kind of internal rational structure which pushes them to the same answer each time. So, and I think the lack of that internal confusion, which meant he went for a different answer each time, is what caused such huge difficulties.
And all the politicians have to be on TikTok now as well, and we know what that does to everyone's attention span. It wrecks it completely.